Hi, welcome back to Intermediate Algebra. Today we have the quadratic formula. So a quadratic is anything that could be made into the form ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. So you can't have any parentheses for this. If you do, you're going to have to get rid of them. You absolutely have to have 0. If you don't have 0, you've got to add and subtract to move everything around so that you do have 0 on one side. It doesn't matter which side. In this example, we have it written with 0 on the right, but it would mean the same thing if 0 was on the left. And I do have one tip here before we start. Do you have fractions? You don't want to do this with fractions if you can help it. If you do, you can always multiply by the least common denominator before you start. So if your common denominator is 3, you just go through and you multiply every piece by 3, and then you don't have any fractions left, and that's definitely nicer. All right, so what is the quadratic formula? Well, I'm glad you asked. It is x is equal to the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. You can find that in your book with better printing than on my board. But here's a couple of things about it. First of all, be careful. I get a lot of messed up order of operations with this. I think it's just a little bit of carelessness. So please be careful. Also, the only x in the quadratic formula is this one that's all by itself. The whole point of this is we're going to find two numerical values for x. Okay, this formula, we're going to plug in a, b, and c, these numbers from our quadratic, into the a's, b's, and c's, is going to just spit out numbers for us. Okay, there won't be any more solving once we're done. Once we plug them in here and work our way through the order of operations to clean that up, we will have the two values that x is equal to. So we'll do a few examples, and yeah, that's this whole section. Let's get started. All right, so here's our first example for using the quadratic formula. I have 3x squared minus 5x plus 2 is equal to 0. So here my a is 3, my b is negative 5. Can't lose that negative, that's really important. And our c is 2. Okay, like I said, that negative, really easy to lose, and unfortunately just would make it wrong, and so we don't want to do that. All right, so I plug it in to my formula, which hopefully you wrote down because I don't have it on the board anymore. So first off, here I have the opposite of b. Well, b is already a negative 5, so I have the opposite of negative 5, which is going to make a positive 5. So be careful with all these negative signs. You really got to watch out for them. It's a very easy place to kind of throw you off and just make really tiny little mistakes. All right, so anyway, opposite of b, plus or minus, here's my b squared. Again, be really careful. If you plug in a negative and square it, it has to be in parentheses. This is especially important if you're using your calculator to figure that out, because if you type that without parentheses, it will tell you that this is negative 25 when it should be a positive 25. Let's see, minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. So I start by cleaning this up. The opposite of negative 5 is 5. Negative 5 squared is 25. Did my multiplication here. 4 times 3 times 2 is 24. And on the bottom, 2 times 3 is 6. Next, I subtract. 25 minus 24 gives me 1. Now, we get here, and in this particular instance, we know this square root. The square root of 1 is just 1. If it's a nice square root, you definitely need to keep going and split this up and get some pretty nice answers out of it. If you have an uglier square root, we'll see one of those here in a minute, then we're just going to probably leave it there. But this one's nice. So it does turn into 1. So you'll notice I split this up now into two parts. Because we have this plus or minus sign, there are still those two solutions that we're going to be getting. So I have 5 plus 1 and 5 minus 1, both of them over 6. 5 and 1 makes 6. 6 over 6 gives me 1. That's one solution. 5 minus 1 is 4, so I get 4 over 6, but being picky and all, I reduce my fraction down to 2/3. And there we go. That's the quadratic formula. So again, a couple of things here. Be really careful going through the mess because it is kind of a big mess. Don't put any x's over into the formula. A lot of times people want to throw those over there and I don't even know what you're trying to do with them because it doesn't work. And then just be really, really careful with those negatives. All right, let's do another example. Okay, for my next example, x squared over 5 minus x is equal to 1/3. So the first thing I notice is I've got fractions. I don't want to do this with fractions. The formula is messy enough as it is. So I'm going to wipe out the fractions by multiplying everything by my common denominator, which in this case is 15. So if I multiply each piece by 15, for the first one, the 5 is going to reduce that and leave me with a 3. 15 times negative x is just negative 15x. And 15 times 1/3 leaves me with a 5. You can go back and check out all the multiplying there with fractions if you want. So that gets me here. And this is great, but there's still one sneaky little thing that's in our way. We don't have 0, right? We have 5, and we don't want to have 5. We need to have 0. So I have to subtract 5, move it to the other side, before I can start working with the quadratic formula. If you don't, then you think that your c is a positive 5, and that's bad. So anyway, I subtracted over, so we can see that a is 3, b is a negative 15, and c is a negative 5. Again, be very careful with all of those negative signs. If you're not, they're going to bite you somewhere, and you don't want that. It's a really easy mistake to make, but you'd probably rather not do it. So let's plug everything in. Opposite of negative 15, because my b is negative 15, plus or minus b squared, again, in parentheses, so that when you use your calculator, you're going to get the positive 225 that you should there. Minus 4 times 3 times negative 5. All right, so I start cleaning it up. The opposite of negative 15 is a positive 15, plus or minus. There's my 225 that I just mentioned. Now here, 4 times 3 is 12 times 5 is 60, but because we have both a minus sign and a negative, it turns it into a plus 60, right? Those two negatives cancel each other out, make it positive. 225 and 60 makes 285, and so now we're here. 15 plus or minus the square root of 285 over 6, which is kind of grotesque. So you're going to have to do a little bit of work here, although on this one you actually don't have to. But you have to check and see if you can simplify that radical. The very first thing you should check is to just see, does that radical come out nice? Well, the square root of 285, definitely not nice. Somewhere between 15 and 16. No, that's not true. Between 16 and 17. Misspoke. All right, so it does not come out nice. You need to simplify it if you can. See if there's anything you can pull out. In this case, we can't pull anything out, so we're left with 15 plus or minus square root of 285 all over 6. Okay, so if you prefer, you could write this as 15 over 6 plus or minus the square root of 285 over 6, and then you should reduce this. Divide by 3, you get 5 halves plus or minus the square root of 285 over 6. So that is plus or minus. There you go. Pretty nice. Honestly, I would have left it there. That's probably the nicest place to leave it. Let's do one more. All right, last example. 1 over x plus 1 plus 1 over x is equal to 1/3. And if I were you at this point, I'd be like, wait a second. That does not look anything like what we've been working with. I know, isn't it great? So here's the thing, though. We're going to use a trick that we actually just talked about. We're going to find the common denominator and multiply everything by that. So I kind of did it quickly. The LCD here is 3x times x plus 1. Right? We just did this kind of stuff, so hopefully you remember how to do it. I went back and I multiplied all 3 of these, and I got 3x for the first fraction, 3 times x plus 1 for the second, and x times x plus 1 for the other side. So remember, we're taking this common denominator and we're multiplying it to wipe out all those fractions. So I kind of took a shortcut there and didn't write down that work. If you need to, go back and do that multiplication. So I distribute my parentheses on both sides. I get 3x plus 3 is equal to x squared plus x. Combine my like terms to get 6x. And now I need to end up with everything on one side. Now I like, in this case, to take everything over to the right, because then I have a positive x squared. It shouldn't matter, but if you do bring it to the left, you will have a negative 1 for a, and you just will have to keep track of that. All right, so I subtracted 6x. X minus 6x gives me the negative 5x, and of course, nothing minus 3 is then minus 3. So now I have what looks like a normal quadratic. 0 equals x squared minus 5x minus 3. So we have a, b, and c again. My b is negative 5, a is 1, don't forget the 1, there's a 1 there, and c is negative 3. I plug it all in, and when I do that, I get a positive 5 plus or minus negative 5 squared is 25. Again, be really careful of those negatives. And then negative 4 and negative times negative 3 makes positive 12. Forgot a parenthesis. There we go. And it's all over 2. 25 and 12 makes 37. Square root of 37, again, not a nice number. It's between 6 and 7, and you cannot pull anything out of that radical. So we're left with this as our solution. And there we go. That's the quadratic formula. So have a great day.